Hello and welcome back to the waiting list. How are we? What's going on? We've just addressed that we're not very happy about the result over the weekend, but should we start this like a normal therapy session and what do you call it? A check-in?
A check-in, yeah. Well, if this were therapy and you were a regular client, I would probably just ask you how the week or the 2 weeks have been since we last met, which I should add leads you to, in a split second, make a decision and give me some sort of a rating, like it was good, it was bad, it was difficult, or whatever you would come up with an answer. And in that, whatever you would say, well, we could just pretend. So Sam, how have things been since we last met?
Bang on down the middle.
Bang on down the middle, okay.
Nothing too crazy. Was meant to have a potential interview tomorrow. That's now been cancelled to later in the week. So, that's thrown me a little bit because I'd kind of had that in my mind. I was ready to go and that's not happening. So, that's that. But it will hopefully be at some point later in the week. But other than that, I'm not too bad. I'm just getting on really. We got a bit deep last session, last episode. I think we're still unsure if we're going to put that in or what. But yeah, how are you? What's going on?
Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. I think perhaps it would be interesting to see when someone engages in therapy and the therapist asks, checks in and asks you how have you been since we last met, and ultimately it's a process. Because you would say, bang in the middle, then I should then retort and say, well, what leads you to take that position? And so you don't just go with, I can't complain, okay, let's move on to the next thing. The whole point is to delve into what led you to give me whatever answer you chose to give me. Was it the absence of stuff that normally bugs you, in terms of anxiety? Is it an absence of thoughts of worrying or catastrophizing, or is it an absence of feelings of low mood, or whatever it may be? And if it's not the absence of something, maybe it's a presence of something positive. Maybe the presence of a more elated, a more positive mood, or something good that has happened in your life. And then you start this process and you delve and you keep on this Socratic questioning. You keep on asking, and that's it. That's an important part of what therapy is. It's creating that consciousness between the individual and their thoughts.
So, do you want me to do it?
I mean, we can if you want, yeah.
Okay, so if we're doing this as an example, bang on down the middle. I haven't particularly done that much, but I haven't done nothing. Obviously, work-wise, there's some things going on, but there's not enough. It's like, bang average. There's nothing. I can't really say there's anything, outstanding that's happened. But then there's also been the football on. There's obviously that meeting that I was planning for. There's been things I've had my mind on. There may have been an assassination attempt at some point over the weekend. So there's been things like busy things kind of in my mind. But in terms of, my OCD, kind of just been ticking along. Actually, that's not particularly true. I have been going against some bits quite a lot recently. So especially, mouthwash, hand washing, and use of other things. I've been trying to actively cut down in my mind.
Okay, well then, lots to unpick, lots to delve into, but for the purpose of obviously the format and the podcast, I'll single out that particular thing, which is your OCD. And what I'm curious about is, well, if there's been a marked progress in you being able to resist your compulsions, what made it so?
There was nothing. I think probably one thing. There was nothing particularly that I needed to do. I wasn't travelling anywhere. I
Mm.
didn't really have to leave the house that much. There wasn't much I needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that. So there was almost not the pressure to do things. I also did actively notice as well. I know I mentioned just before the episode, a friend of mine has come back from Thailand after 2 years there.
Yeah.
And when I picked him up from the airport on Saturday, something happened, and I don't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And he's probably going to call me all sorts of names for saying this.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt he's like me and him were inseparable when we were younger, kind of as teenagers. We did not leave each other's side. And there was something when he got back and his like energy, I was like, I felt like, I don't want to say whole again, but I felt like a piece from my life had come back in. I was like, oh my God, like he straight away made me laugh, was telling all these crazy stories and what he's been up to. And there was something about that I kind of went, there's a piece being added back into my life, which was really weird, because I have in the past cut myself off from a lot of friends. So, I think that's one thing. But yeah, so I think it's just, I've probably I had it in my mind, I think probably after last session, the fact that I knew I was kind of slipping away with certain things that I went, right, I need to go against it again. And just pushing it a little bit more and trying to do things. So yeah.
All right. Well, please tell me about your friends. Maybe there's an anecdote you feel able to share with us, and I'm keen to hear about that. That crazy story.
I spoke to him this morning. He wanted to see if I wanted to have a coffee, and he did say that he'd like to come on the podcast at some point.
Oh, great stuff! Yeah.
You would not know what to do with him. I won't name him personally, but I'll just call him Danger. That's what he refers to himself as Danger. Yeah. His middle name. He will call himself the Danger. He is unlike anyone. Really, he is really his own person. And it was very emotional when because his mum didn't know he was coming back, and there's been some personal stuff going on while he was away. So when he got back, it was like a big his seeing his mum hold on to him. Was it was like very touching, because she was just like shaking to see him, which was it was really, really sweet. And she sent my mum a lovely message after about me, which makes you feel good. But yeah, he's a real wild card. He went to he's completely opposite to me. When I think we finished school, he went off and did the whole Southeast Asia, Cambodia, that whole route, and then was there until I think COVID started. So that was a good year. Came back for COVID for a little bit, went off to South America, did the whole of Mexico, went to California, worked on a weed farm on the border of California and Mexico. That's a whole other thing in itself.
A legal or illegal farm?
Undisclosed. I think from what he told me is it's owned by businessmen in America, but it's also half illegal as well. So it's kind of both. But there's some crazy stories that I wouldn't ever get in. I'd let him do that. Sure. So then he was there for I think another year or so, and then came back quickly, and then went off to India, went to obviously Mumbai, and I think he did Mumbai and like Delhi, and then went to Goa, which is near the coast, I think.
And so he did the odd job, left and right,
He'd saved up money from just labouring stuff here, I think, or mostly. But he found India too crazy. When he was in Mumbai, and he was like, I can't do this. This is too nuts. Went to Australia, worked on some military base in Australia, just outside of Perth, I think, and then went from there to Thailand, and had been living there for the past however long, just doing him. But I mean, yeah, he like vlogs things as well on his phone, and he'll just send it into group chats, and I will save them because I never know if he's going to have his phone or not. So a lot of the time I just save them. So I've got, some real crazy videos on my phone of things that But he came back this time, and I don't want to say he seems more grown, I think, since he got back. But yeah, he's a real interesting cat.
And I'm interested to see how that makes you feel ultimately. So you said him coming back was like a missing piece of the puzzle that reintegrated your life. There's multiple ways of looking at that. On the one hand, I think for you, well, the disparity couldn't be any bigger. Yeah.
We are.
You have on the one hand is your peer, your friend that travels the world and is taking all of these risks, and then you trying to minimize risk and exerting control and ultimately living quite a cooped up life. My assumption would be that wasn't always easy for you to be confronted with, obviously his stories and that he shared, and that to a degree.
No, I couldn't think of anything worse. To be completely honest, the things he gets up to personally, couldn't think of anything worse. I mean, he has, even like my other friends, people that we all know very close, they will say, no, like not. He will even say sometimes he pushes the boat out too far.
Okay. All right.
He takes, there's travelling and living in hostels, he takes that to another level. So there's not one thing in my mind where I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that. I'm a bit jealous.
Okay, fair
there's nothing that goes on in my mind to do that.
So when he comes back, if I were to simplify it, either it permits you to continue down the road, that you've been on, and with the addition of your friend, and you feel kind of whole again, and things are the way they used to be, or it will translate into you coming out of your shell even more so, and with the support of your friends, because it's a reality, and you hear that constantly on podcasts where people say, the people that you surround yourself with, the 5 most influential friends you have, they, of course, it rings true. That is true. Yeah. So with your friend coming back, I wonder, it could go 2 ways. You could either say, well, I'm comfortable. I'm even more comfortable with my friend being back, and I'm not going to push the envelope. Or he will go, right, Sam, let's do this together to a certain extent.
He doesn't like to chill. He also likes to party, and which we are just slightly different in that sense. Because I think when I was younger, we were always together and doing things. But but again, straight away yesterday, he was going to watch the football in London, and I hadn't thought about going into London before. I was like, I'm not doing that. As soon as he said it, I was like, I might go with him because that'll be funny. And I decided, I was like, no, because I've got to be up here, and I was like, if we lose, what's the point? And we lost, so it wouldn't have been that fun anyway. And then you got to get the train back. So yeah, I think we kind of even each other out anyway. Yeah. I mean, even his mum will say, like, when we brought him back on whatever day it was, Saturday, and I was at the door, and his mum saw me because I'm stood, by the glass, so she can't see him. He's hid behind me, and when she saw me, her face went white. Oh. Because I'm to her his like safe friend. Like, she's always said, like, if you're with Miles, I know everything's all right. And that's kind of like the message she sent my mum as well. So when she saw me, she said after, she was like, I know if anything ever bad happened, you'd be the one that pulls the short straw and has to come tell the family. So when she saw me, and there'd been a lot of things going on while he was out there as well, which I won't get into. So she already was very worried. And I just kind of moved to the side, and he was there. She did a 180. Yeah, but that I saw her face, and that first initial kind of panic, she went white. But anyway, so yeah, that's that. I'll burn a candle in her name. Yeah, I don't know what that means. Well, that if and when I do sincerely hope you enjoy or you get to the point of knowing what I'm on about. But if and when you become a father or a parent, you'll know. Okay. You'll understand. I could see that when she held on to him, it was like that's the purest love you can. even though he
and
is
it's
a
so
prick.
one-sided. Not so much in from the perspective of love, but the concern, the worry. That's very one-sided.
Yeah, I know. And we've got Jamie going away to Australia soon, so I don't know what my mum's going to be like. She's going to be in a right state. Maybe we could get her on the podcast and get her to rant away about how she feels. But anyway, so that's that. I mean, I was going to say, let's get into this kind of episode. I wanted to cover depression.
Yeah, good. Happy
and I
days.
wanted to do it with a smile on my face because, as my dad said this morning, don't make it too, somber. So I have, got questions, and I thought
I agree.
Interject.
Yeah, I'm sorry for interjecting. I agree with your dad, and it's something I reflected on about the podcast. Is there's so much content being made, and quite a bit when I look at my colleagues who are courageous enough to obviously put themselves out there and then have guests on and so on. It can be quite somber, and I think it's it's good for in that it helps people to relate. But I'm quite keen to
do it with a smile.
Do with a smile. It doesn't need to be all that heavy. And depression is a topic you can you can discuss.
And get depressed
whilst being depressed or whilst feeling on top of the world. It still applies.
Yeah.
And I hope we manage to be
I mean, it's more
to create that content.
As what I've said before, the reason I want to do this podcast, because if it can genuinely help people, if there's some type of thing that you can recommend or say, or things that we've case studies, whatever it is. And after this episode today, we will be releasing the first five. And then we'll I'm going to do a big question thing for people, so we can come on and just go through questions. So I mean, the initial thing that I wanted to ask in terms of depression, I think it's really important to find a definition for it, because I think a lot of people will say, I'm depressed. I saw a friend yesterday and she was going, I'm depressed. Yeah. And I think it's a very strong word to use. What's the difference between kind of general sadness and depression, like between general sadness and depression? Because it obviously is a very generalised word. How would you personally define it? Because even I don't know how to define it, really. I'd say not leaving bed, you're that, you have no hope left in the world. Yeah. Again, smile on my face. How would you define it?
All right, so, firstly, it's important to point to the fact that anyone and everyone that works within mental health services, from primary care onwards to all the other services that come into play, we should all agree on the shared definition. And there is such a thing as a dictionary of mental health presentations. So you have the DSM, which is mostly used in the States, and the ICD-11, so it's the 11th version of or review of the ICD, which stands for International Classification of Diseases or Disorders. And so the ICD gives us the definition. And so we should all go by that, because if anyone, or if all of us start to use our own definitions, then we're all going to get lost in the woods. So what is the proper definition of depression? Well, you have 9 criteria. If you meet 5 of the 9 criteria over a 2-week period, you would meet the threshold for a formal diagnosis of depression. So depression is a 2-week period of persistent low mood, low energy, and a loss of pleasure. And then the categories are that during those 2 weeks, it's a persistent feeling of low mood. So it's not sometimes in the evening, but not during the day, or only constant. It's constant, and it has an impact on your day-to-day life, meaning it should impact your ability to perform at work, or it should impact your ability to go about your day-to-day business, depending on the stage of life that you're in. If you're a student that's studying and socializing and so on, But so 2 weeks persistently, low mood, low energy, you could have what they call psychomotor retardation or agitation. So basically being agitated or being a bit more slow and again less energetic seen from an outsider's perspective. You would be plagued by an undue sense of guilt. Yeah, so you'd feel quite guilty most of the time, and often an exaggerated
for not
sense of
doing
guilt.
anything.
For not doing anything, for being who you are, you may feel a burden to other people, or you may feel that you've completely lost or squandered opportunities. Yeah, that if you look back at your life, the only thing you see are mistakes and failures. So it's that sense of guilt, and then you go, well, because my life is only about failures, this person doesn't, or I don't deserve, this person.
So it's just completely negative
It's
kind of whole, everything.
It's a lot of negative rumination. You would have concentration difficulties, or you would have difficulties making decisions. So it's that kind of indecisiveness. Your sleep, you would either sleep too much or not enough. So either, you would sleep like 14 hours a night / a day and still feel tired, or you would wake up during the night and not be able to go back to sleep, or you'd have difficulties initiating sleep.
I had one when I was coming up with these questions.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who does suffer quite bad with depression, I spoke to her, and she'd said that her mum, when she goes into these kind of depressive episodes, it's not about what you can try, get yourself up, go to the gym, do all that stuff. Her mum, her one thing in the day would be like, get out of bed and clean your teeth. And then, try and do 2 things the next day and kind of build it on that instead. And I think that's important for people to know, that it's like, it can be that in terms of, your one thing to do in a whole day if you're in a complete kind of depressive hole, would be to brush your teeth, which for most people is just, a normal thing.
Yeah, for sure. But then you speak of a clinical depression of severe impairment.
So there's like a severity scale essentially.
There is a severity scale. You've got, broadly speaking, mild, moderate, severe. Yeah, and this example that you gave to me is severe, and that does for sure happen. Luckily, it's not all or nothing. Not everyone who experiences depression to that degree. And you have also functional types of depression. I'll try and just complete that list, because that's the definition of depression.
Sorry, yeah.
So it's fine. We were at sort of low energy, indecisiveness, sleep. Yeah, your weight would fluctuate. You would either gain or lose weight, but not linked to you trying to follow a certain diet. You may be preoccupied by feelings or thoughts, more like it, of death as a theme. But also it could be applicable in that you may have thoughts of suicide, and that could be passive or beyond that active, and the difference between a passive type of suicidal ideation, which is quite commonplace when people feel there's no hope and they've been depressed for a while, and active is that someone has a plan and an intent to act upon that, and they've been mulling over how, whereas this passive type of, I'm finished, I'm tired, I have no more to give, I wish I could fall asleep and not wake up, that's more a passive type of suicidal ideation. Or if something were to happen to me, that would be okay, because it takes away the pain and that I'm currently experiencing. Is there anything else I need to think of? Would that be 9? Well, more or less.
Okay, so what are the 9? Just so you can. So the 9,
So it's sadness. Yeah. It's anhedonia, or loss of experiencing pleasure whilst engaging in activities that would normally procure you any type of pleasure. Eating, exercising, socializing, playing video games, watching a movie, reading a book, and so on. Low energy, your sleep is impaired, your appetite fluctuates, or your weight fluctuates, feelings of guilt and concentration difficulties, indecisiveness,
Suicidal
and
thoughts,
lastly, suicidal thoughts, or being consumed by this existentialism or difficulties in relating to the theme of death.
That has been, persistent over 2 weeks.
Persistent, 5 of these persistent over 2 weeks. You would then meet the threshold for clinical
Depression.
Clinical depression, and then what causes depression is there is a genetic predisposition. To most mental health difficulties, there is a genetic predisposition, but as we've spoken about previously, it's not because you have these genes that therefore they will be expressed. So you may have the genes that would, on paper, lead to being more prone to develop, clinical depression. But if by chance none of the catalysts or the events that would trigger these genes to be expressed or to start being expressed doesn't happen, because your life story is one of being nurtured, and you don't go through periods of chronic stress or neglect or trauma, or it doesn't even need to be that serious, then you may go on in life without developing that depression. But there's also contextual factors, even with or without the genetic predisposition.
Just life,
just
yeah,
pressure from work, expectations to meet,
lose the job, girlfriend, boyfriend.
And then last, I'd say, is you can, and these 3 things can be true at the same time. So you can have a genetic predisposition,
lose
you
your
can have
job,
a context, but there's also your life story. And personally, as a psychologist, that's what I focus most on. So context and life story, meaning let's go together through the story of your life, and let's start to make sense as to why you've ended up thinking the way you do, because it's not so that the person is a problem. No one needs to be fixed, but an individual will live with depression. And what is depression? Well, it's a certain way of thinking. So it's a certain way of thinking that has been incorporated as a consequence of going through certain life events. These thoughts tend to elicit in us a way of feeling. So let's say feeling sad, and whether we realize it or not, when we feel a certain emotion strongly enough, we will react to it. And that can be through dissociation or trying to distract yourself from these emotions. And so for some it's working really hard and going all in, in that, focusing on something away from, being consumed by thoughts and sadness. For others, it's the phone, it's gaming, it's drugs, it's alcohol, it's promiscuity, it's all sorts of things, yeah? But that's what it boils down to. And then if you look at the latter part, together with the context, which is very important to always keep in mind, I can give you an example, but when you look at someone's life story and you create a rationale, that's the first step that someone really needs, is to start to understand.
Because it can go in there, they can...
Yeah, you start to move away from, I am unworthy, I am not strong enough, I am not good enough, or whatever someone believes about themselves. You move away from that to, I am not the problem, but I think and act in a way that keeps me looping in this sadness, it keeps this depression a bit. And even when I am depressed, which is a problem, or when I should say, even when depression is part of my life, yeah,
you've got to think of it as like I do with the OCD. It's not you personally, it's another thing.
It's a thing. You could almost lay it down on the table and look at it, and you can name it, give it a shape, and then it becomes something that you can work on, yeah. But it's not the whole of you. There's not this alignment with the mental health difficulty. You are much more than whatever difficulty you're struggling with.
So, as you've just said, there's a lot of, when we were talking about people, podcasters and people making stuff, there's a ridiculous, if you type in how to beat depression on YouTube, you will have thousands of videos.
Yeah, sure.
I can guess, out of those thousands of videos, most of them are going to say cold showers, gym, this, that, go for a walk, go see your friends, go to the pub, do all they get all these kind of self-help people give you tons of different things. Obviously you've got the Joe Rogan kind of school of thought, which isn't his school of thought, but he kind of preaches, which is eat really well, exercise, cold showers, that type of thing. which is great. But I know people who have been in a real rut, like we just said, like the friend of mine who her only thing that she can physically do in a day to try and, you know, that her mum would just say, just brush your teeth today. A cold shower or going to the gym or, you know, any of those things, that's miles away.
Yeah.
For someone who is in a rut like that, obviously that's a very extreme case, but, you know, I wouldn't say that I really suffer with depression, but there's times when it's like, you know, you don't want to drag yourself out, you don't want to do it, and most of the time I won't. I'll kind of give into it and just be like, yeah, I don't want it, and you just go down that kind of negative hole. For someone who's in a rut like that, instead of saying, you know, jump in a cold shower or exercise, what would you say is a good kind of, you know, just starter block to get yourself moving?
Okay. Well, firstly, I should say if you have a depression of that level, it's warranted to have a psychiatric assessment. You know, in this case, you need a psychiatrist to oversee the care, and it will most likely be appropriate to consider medication. And medication can be a lifesaver and can really help stabilize people, and that's just a given. So if a client, let's say, would come to me and that's the story they bring, and that's been a recurrent thing, well, you would think of...
As in them not being able to leave bed?
Yeah, so that type of... And it's so I would consider, you know, whether it could be, you know, a bipolar disorder or... But clearly, there is a biological underlying reason, yeah, if that were to... Not necessarily so in 100% of cases, but quite likely that there's a biological underlying reason why, if people are, you know, going, you know, through their day-to-day lives and being, you know, they're functioning, yeah. So they hold down a job, they maybe have a family, and then suddenly they, you know, all of that kind of goes. Even without the mania, you know, I would...
What do you mean the mania?
So obviously the converse, the opposite of having that very kind of low mood would be...
is the... Right.
You know, mania, where it's the complete opposite, like bursts of energy, you know, big idea thinking, your speed, or your speech is kind of pressured, and lots of ideas. I mean, yeah, you can tell is, you know, it's day and night, and that's how bipolar disorder presents, is these periods of mania with elated mood and, you know, tons of energy, followed by these periods of very kind of low mood, of being lethargic, being despondent, and so on. So, but if someone were to present like that and they've never had, you know, any kind of psychiatric or psychological input, and I'm the first person they see, I would advise to start with a psychiatric assessment and then come back to me for therapy, because it you know, it seems that's just clinically the right thing to do, and then we could, you know, once this person is kind of stable on most likely some type of medication, and you've got that kind of medical oversight as well from the psychiatrist, I would work alongside the psychiatrist and you know, engage in therapy. And do I answer your question? Well, in this case, yeah, I think, I don't know if that is the case or isn't the case, but I suppose this person has seen a psychiatrist, and if not, that seems to be an appropriate first step. And
I mean, I was kind of asking as well, from the fact of, let's say you can't get to a psychiatrist, you can't get to a psychologist, you can't afford it, you can't get into the NHS, whatever it is, you can't even get to a doctor. I was kind of thinking more, I don't want to say holistic, but do you know what I mean? More, is there anything personal or family and friends?
Yeah.
You know, people that are around this, whoever the person is, particular person, can do or suggest or whatever it is in terms of just trying to get that, because I'm sure there's people in depressions who won't even take themselves to the doctor or a psychiatrist unless they had literally picked up by someone.
Yeah, true.
So I was thinking more, you know, that literal starter block to get someone moving, to kind of get the wheels turning at least. just what would you, if it's friends
Well,
and family?
again, it depends on so many variables. Is the person open and comfortable? Do they feel safe enough to share that? Is this known? But let's assume, for sake of argument, that it seems like you spoke of someone who lives at home still, and their mum is with them. So again, I would assume the mum is well aware of the clinical presentation. So that's for sure. You mentioned it yourself. Like, having support is very important, and ideally you have family or friends or around you that step in and do some damage control. Yeah. So make sure that you don't sink beyond that point where you're just very isolated with these difficulties. So yes, it's true. The network needs to step in and take responsibility to a certain extent to make sure that the person is safe and looked after and so on. And then everything you mentioned, still holds true. The cold shower is not it's not about whether it's a cold shower or not, but it's about slowly but surely integrating achievements and keep track of it. Because when you're depressed, even when you're not depressed, by the way, and that goes back to the very first question, when I checked in with you, we have a tendency to just wipe off the table of achievements and focus on the negatives. So someone who's really depressed, you want them to keep track of what they do. Because if I were to see someone that's, say moderately depressed, and I ask them on the spot, how's your week been? Yeah, well, the answer will be not good. Because they hold on to and they clutch on to. But if you then say, okay, let's check whether that is your opinion or whether that's fact, and then you look at the week, then you'll see, well, on Monday you did get out of bed and you did you cleaned up the house and you loaded the dishwasher and you rang this person and you did. These seemingly very trivial things aren't trivial at all when you're faced with a moderate or severe depression. But you need to keep track of that. So that's a very important step, is because if you don't do that and then you meet someone on a weekly basis and you go like, yeah, how's your week? They will just have forgotten about all the achievements, hold on to, well, I've still lost my job, or my partner still left me, or I still feel utterly crap and hopeless. And that's the thing that they will share with you. And you need to help them reconnect with the achievements. And there will be achievements.
Like, daily wins.
Daily wins. And if there's a challenge ahead of them, how do they feel before the challenge and how do they feel thereafter? Because almost certainly there's gains there. Yeah. So if there's something that you've been procrastinating about, you haven't done, you've been postponing 100% almost. If you take a reading before and after that achievement and the person's gone through it, there will be a marked improvement. And so it's true, you want to socialize, you want to speak with others, you want to enlarge in your scope of thinking, because one of the things that depression does is it really narrows your inner
just like
world.
a dark hole.
You keep on ruminating about what's not going well, or you keep on worrying about stuff that will or will not happen, but you're in your mind, and what is in your mind is very dark, it's very negative, and oh so narrow. And so you need to have conversations with other people who may, perhaps you broach the subject, perhaps you talk about something completely different, but you need that socializing, you need exercise, you need sleep and so on.
It sounds very when you meet people who are very cynical and kind of that cynicism around them, it almost seems like that. Like it's they kind of, and you meet people who are very kind of cynical about life. They probably do have some type of depression, because it's like everything's bad. Government's you kind of they go down these holes of just negativity. So it would probably be better to be optimistic, and they hate optimistic people. And I think I can kind of border on both, to be perfectly me personally. I'll be very cynical about things and then be very optimistic about things. But I think it's really, just as you were saying that, then it was very interesting thinking about people who I do know are quite cynical, and it's like a very similar kind of thinking pattern to go down those holes. But okay, so it's very much like daily wins.
So small achievable steps and keeping track of what you actually do, because do more than you would remember or that you would give yourself credit
acknowledge
for.
and
Yeah. And then again, it's all about perspective taking. Someone who feels they're not doing well and compare themselves to others who in their minds are more successful in the dimension that they compare themselves with, which is only a tiny fraction of what the experience is of that person that you compare yourself with. And usually people go through social media to do that. If you're, let's say, physically ill, all you want in that moment is to be healthy again, yeah? But if you've been healthy for a while, you can be healthy and think, oh, my life is utterly, pointless and devoid of meaning, and it's just it's such a hurtful existence. But if you could take the person to that place of being ill, that same person may be in the mindset of, oh, I just,
if
wish
I could just be healthy again,
then everything would be okay. And I see it happen, so often where, people complain about all sorts of aspects of their lives until they become ill, and then what was a challenge to begin with becomes something they yearn for. I wish I had this bodily autonomy again, so I could do this and could do that. Or again, perspective taking is, I would think is what happens in therapy, is that you help people realize that any event that they go through in life, and I do mean any, is never entirely good or entirely bad. Even the most darkest and the most difficult of times come with a silver lining. But sometimes it's apparent in the moment, and at times, decades or more than one decade goes by before you realize, I see now how had this not happened, it wouldn't have led me to where I am now, and where I am now is something I can, feel really, closely connected to, or whatever that may be, or achievements, or people around.
Always look on the bright side.
But it's true, and so any experience has a multitude of perspectives. And again, this very podcast, this very hour that we will have spent together with Jamie, is a different experience in your mind, my mind, and Jamie's mind. And so, what is the truth about who has the right experience out of the three of us? Well, there is no such thing. Yeah. So you do. So you can't undo difficult moments that you've been through in life. But what you can do is choose which perspective you want to hold onto about that experience, and that's what
you create your own perspective on things.
That's the agency people have. Yeah, is how do you allow someone else? How do you allow an emotion? How do you allow certain thoughts to affect you? The thoughts you can't really do much about. They just come into your mind. Some may be intrusive, some may not. Your emotions are a consequence of a multitude of things, but usually, thought related, and that may be a reality to you, but you still have agency and ownership of how you want to relate to that emotion, how you want to relate to these thoughts. Do you want to just observe them and let them go? Do you want to challenge them? That's within your purview.
And kind of now we've nailed that, in terms of where to start and things like that. Where do you think it's, in terms of recently, because it does seem that there's, over the past 10 years, let's say, generalized anxiety disorder, that, and then depression seem to have gone through the roof.
Skyrocketed, yeah.
I think the quick answer is social media, people not being outside as much, vitamin D, seeing friends as much, all those different things. Is there anything else that you think that you've seen in your practice, where it's not that?
Where it's not that, well, for sure. So you've got, again, going back to genetic predisposition, genetic load of certain conditions. You have,
but surely that would have been, this is the last 10 years, or is it just that people are more open to speak about it?
So from that point of view, I would say just look where we come from. If you look at how we used to live in tight-knit communities, villages, where you had through maybe oversight from many people sticking their nose into your business, which was perhaps annoying, but you also had that kind of social control and social support, and it really wasn't a case of you being by yourself. You had a network of people, whether they were related to you or not, that would step in. And this phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, it holds true, and it hasn't appeared out of nowhere. Yeah. So there's been a shift from a more kind of rural village type living to this urban lifestyle that we now
isolated
know, where we're much more isolated indeed, and it's a much more individualistic type of living. And you look at religion, the place that religion has, or we still have religion, at least that's my opinion. It's just morphed into different beliefs, but that need to believe in something beyond ourselves, that's innate. And even people who would consider themselves to be agnostic or not religious still ultimately have that belief, or have that need to believe in something. Then you have this idea of the God that used to be an external person to us, the higher power overseeing us and kind of regulating and dispensing the morals and the values that we should abide by. That's no longer there, or in a far kind of smaller proportion. But what happened is that we've internalized that. So now there's not one external God, there's a multitude of gods that live inside of each and every one of us. Yeah.
What do you mean?
Is that this idea of a God being external has been internalized, and now people, you can see it being displayed on social media, are themselves judges of others' way of lives or beliefs, and so this idea of an external God has now been internalized, and people are more than is it Purinistic? What is the word?
Puritan.
Puritans, thanks. Yeah, have become Puritans, but not so much in the way they conduct themselves, but in the way that they observe
how
others.
Everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, again, and so that's been a big shift. And some would say that whether it is your belief in how society should be structured, or the duality of man versus nature. And obviously comes into play this idea of a climate crisis unfolding and the humans being responsible for that, and then people obviously being quite quick to judge others for their lifestyle, and perhaps even engaging with some virtue signaling, but obviously not wanting to be put in mirror
judge
in front
themselves.
of them. Yeah. And that's again this idea of God has been incorporated. So now I judge everyone around me. And I am, the source of truth okay, and then you add to that the destigmatization of mental health, which indeed is also a factor that plays a part. And then you add to that indeed the fact that we now have social media and the whole economy of these platforms being click-bait economic models. So there's an exaggerated sense of this kind of alarmist and catastrophic thinking, which we are by default much more prone to being drawn to. Yeah, we are emotional beings. Then you add to that COVID, which indeed has even increased that isolation.
It's just like layers on.
So there's all these various layers, and that leads to the rise in cases. So. And all of these things can, come into play for some, or all of them, or so maybe just a one or two. Again, we're still individuals, but broadly speaking, I would say that's a landscape you look at, and that explains why, especially within teens, and you speak of social contagion and social media, which
social contagion.
Social contagion is the spread of. And how if someone close to you, say, presents with a certain difficulty and they display that and it creates a whole dynamic around them, how that rubs off on other people. Yeah. And so how you have this spread of certain ideas, or even you could say mental health difficulties that spread within groups, and it becomes the affinity that binds the group together. and so that type of negative thinking becomes exacerbated. And
so it's like tribal thinking.
It's
like
a tribal thing, yes, for sure. And so certain ideas or ways of being are exacerbated within that in group versus the out group, and there's a certain wariness of those external to the group, and again,
they're the outsiders. We're right, you're wrong.
And so this kind of negativity about life, or everybody hates me and I'm not accepted and so on. Whilst there may be some truth to it, that there may be family difficulties, or these are children or even adults who really struggle to fit in, and there's been some bullying. It's kind of this looping of negativity, and obviously without it being
like an echo chamber
where certain ideas are increase in intensity, but also where there's a certain type of upping the ante constantly. So if someone shares some negativity, and that as a consequence draws the attention of the group to that person,
and then someone goes worse,
someone will think, well, I want that attention to be put on me now, and so it just worsens the situation for most of them. While saying that, there is also something positive, because for many of these kind of groups and the individuals that constitute this group, it can be the only place where they feel they have connection with others. And that's what obviously they are aware of, and that's what they want. They're not so aware of the fact that compared to the general population or this out group, the thinking, the speech, the narrative that they hold on to is so much more negatively.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, but again, it goes back to there's really no right or wrong, or everything and anything in life
is your own perception.
Has different perspectives on it. It's neither entirely good nor entirely bad, and you can't just say that to someone, especially teenagers. You can't just speak at them. It will just wash over them. That's the thing with therapy. You want to create rapport, safety, trust. And then you want the client to come through their own conclusions that, hold on a minute, maybe there's another way of thinking, and maybe what if...
Not you pushing it on them.
No, not you pushing it. That they'll push back on that.
Okay. I had another question, but it was kind of similar to the first one. And I think you brought up, drugs and alcohol before. Particularly alcohol, because it's very much in the culture in this country. I don't personally drink very much. Everyone in my family drinks. There's probably a few verging on alcoholics. I won't name names. But, and I've got friends who've got alcoholics in their family. I mean, like real alcoholics. What would you say the link between... Because... For me, if I was ever really sad, or in that kind of depressive state, let's say, with all the things you'd listed, and I've ticked every box for 2 weeks, and I'm never in my mind would I think I should have a drink. Personally, I cannot get my head around it. I can understand it when you're out with friends, have a drink, and it just kind of maybe, but the understanding, like I know full well I'm going to wake up the next morning and feel like crap. Why do people do it? And what's the... Hold on, we've had an issue. We okay? Sorry, we just had a quick technical issue. What's the kind of link, and would you say the thinking behind someone who they get in that depressive state, they start drinking, and it seems to just by itself kind of roll. And I just personally cannot kind of get my head around it, because I don't know why you'd want to be in that state all the time. But then I do understand, when you're waking up with a hangover, you start drinking again to try and get rid of the hangover. So I understand that bit. But the initial thing of, everything's going terribly, I know what can fix this. Alcohol. Just personally in my mind, I cannot understand it.
Okay. Well, I like the fact that you said, I know what can fix this, because this isn't your situation or the reality. The this that you allude to is the distress we feel inside of us, and that's applicable to, I'd say, pretty much everyone. Yeah. So, in the way that you've described it, when someone goes to drink, they don't drink because they think it's going to make the situation better. They drink because they can no longer tolerate the distress, the emotional distress within them, of the realization of how, you know, their lives have gone to shits because of the drink or because of other difficulties. Yeah. So that's why people, you know, would turn to drink. But again, that applies to some, but you also have, again, a genetic predisposition
To alcohol.
well, to reacting in a specific way to alcohol and then becoming, you know, addicted to it, and that, you know, luckily but also unluckily for those who have inherited that in a genetic pattern, is quite difficult to overcome. Yeah, not impossible clearly, but is difficult to overcome because, again, you have that biological underlying reality that just makes it so that if I have a pint, I don't immediately go to, you know, wanting more, versus someone who, you know, would have that predisposition, would have one,
Yes,
and they just, you know.
I've got a lot of my friends, if you go out if you just get a pint, I can have one pint and go home. There's no, you know, issue at all. But before they've even finished one, they've ordered another.
Yeah.
And I personally just can't get my head around that. I mean, that's not really the question, but I think, you know, so you're saying the alcohol itself is used to kind of get rid of that, let's say if it's like a box or the thing of depression, so it's not you, it's to kind of
Depression specifically, yes. I mean, it mainly
or were you saying generally in most disorders?
Well, in alcoholism, you know, you can be alcoholic without being depressed. Equally,
but that is
you can be
common,
depressed without, you know, turning to alcohol.
It's kind of the common link.
It's a common link. I'm not sure. So, to be honest, I would have to look into things as to what the research suggests. Inevitably, there will be a link. There'll be a correlation. In some cases, it may be even a causal relation. But I'm not sure that, you know, that those who drink all have, you know, depression. Or that people who are depressed necessarily will drink more. Again, you just mentioned culture. It's probable, yeah, that people do, but not always, yeah. And then with alcohol, I think with everything, there's a multitude of variables. So you can have the genetic predisposition, but there's culture, yeah, and culture can be on the societal level, but it could also be within a friendship group, could also be within a family. And so how you've grown up with alcohol and what place it has, you know, taken in your life and what you associate with the use of alcohol, that also plays a part. And that is the case for most of us in the West, you go to social gatherings, you know, from a young age, you know, with family, there tends to be alcohol involved. So we really kind of impregnate this idea on, or imprint this idea onto a child that, you know, good times
equals alcohol,
equals having alcohol involved. And then obviously there's the kind of the drinking culture of drinking to get drunk rather than drinking to enjoy. Like, it used to be the case that in schools in France at the age of 14, at midday, during your midday lunch, you would drink beer or you would drink wine. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Maybe not, you know, strength, it would be table beer or it would be, you know, but that's never been an issue. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see if that has developed a habit within that cohort or generational cohort, or whether the opposite is true, whether because they've grown up with it as being part and parcel of day-to-day life, and you know, you can maybe they haven't gone to that stage where you often, you know, which you often see here in the UK or in some countries in Europe where people turn 18 or 16 all the way to their mid-20s or sometimes beyond, they get blackout drunk, at least once a week, and then if not more
Yeah,
than
I've
that.
never. I don't. But I mean, even I won't throw my dad completely under the bus because he's definitely not an alcoholic. But he will, if he's in a bad mood or something's happened or whatever it is, he'll go, "Oh, have a glass of wine."
Yeah.
I'll go, but how is that?
Because it kicks in your dopaminergic system, and dopamine is closely linked to learning. So, someone who does that, whose first or default response is to have a drink when they feel, again, any type of emotion, be it I'm tired or I'm stressed
or even happy or
whatever. Yeah, you've taught yourself to go for that drink. Why? Because we start to produce dopamine in higher amounts during the anticipation phase of a certain behavior, of which we know obviously will lead to an increase in dopamine or availability of dopamine. And then obviously alcohol does that. It does increase, your availability of dopamine, and that's why drinking is, is seen as a reward. And then you add to that, not so much for the case that you've described with your father, but social anxiety plays a part in that as well. Most people, when they go to a social gathering, feel a bit, queasy, uneasy about.
Yeah, people have drinks before they go.
They go, yeah, exactly, and that is to do with this idea of, I couldn't possibly tolerate, mingling with all these people and then being consumed with the thought of what are they thinking about me and how do I come across, and so they drink to calm down the nerves. And then another thing that happens is, okay, so imagine you feel a certain way, you're a bit anxious, you're a bit stressed, you're not too happy. You start to drink, maybe with your mates at the pub, and you have one drink or two drinks, and you go, wait a minute, 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, I felt like this, now I feel like this. This is the effect of 2 pints. Yeah, I've gone from being a bit low and stressed to feeling happy, bubbly, not being bothered by inhibitions. So your mind goes, well, if 2 drinks has achieved this leap forward, imagine if I take 4 drinks or 6 drinks or 10 drinks, how good will I feel when I reach But we all know that doesn't go like that.
You're chasing the devil.
Yeah, you go up to a certain level of, you could say, optimal happiness and being relaxed and chatty, and to obviously then it stagnates and then you just go downwards from then on.
It's funny you say that as well, because a lot of people will say, from what I've heard personally, is like their most favourite part of when they have a drink is that kind of tipsy phase before they're drunk.
Yeah.
It's that kind of, you start to get the kind of beer goggles come on a little bit, and I agree with that. That's kind of, for me, if I ever have a drink, I like that phase, and then after that I'm tired, I want to go home. I have no interest anymore.
You go for the first time.
Yeah, when you go for it, you break the seal.
Yeah.
Or stand up for the first time.
Or stand if you've been sitting down. So I do understand that. I don't know. I've always found it very difficult for someone who's in a low mood already. I mean, it does make sense. I've just always found, for someone not to think that, or to think that is in any way going to help you. It almost just feels it's completely against what, you could be doing, or.
Yeah.
It's I'm in a bad mood, I've had a bad day. Instead of getting an early night, having a good sleep, eating some good food, I'm going to go drink and stay out. And just personally in my head, I've never really been able to get my head around it. I understand the dopamine thing, but yeah.
Well, the dopamine thing, it's also... Well, no.
Sorry if I just butted in.
No, not at all. Jamie was signing to me.
I was going to say, quickly say something. There was what you were just going to say, add to. A lot of times there was a thing I watched, and then someone was talking about why they drink, and it was the reason they drink is because they have no self-esteem and no social awareness when they're sober, and when they drink, just even 2 drinks, they can talk to people, and they just almost confident boost that they need in their life, and then obviously sometimes that can spiral out of control a little bit, cause but I think initially a lot of alcoholism will start because people aren't confident.
Yeah, for sure. But it's a great anxiolytic. It reduces your levels of anxiety, whatever the source of the anxiety is. But social anxiety makes sense. So it does what it's supposed to do. The problem is that we lose ourselves in the process.
You start tracing the dragon. Okay. I mean, I've tried to do it with a smile on my face. Those are all the questions I had particularly on depression. I mean, is there anything else you'd like to kind of get across? I think depression, it's such like kind of a wide blanket statement. I mean, it's not as well. But I think people use it as I'm depressed or, and usually if you have something else, you're probably suffering with depression too. So I think it is a wide old thing, but I just thought those questions could be of use to people.
Well, listen, I think in those three cases I've described, one being the biological reality of people's, genetic makeup, two being the context, and three being, how you think and how you behave in reaction to certain emotions. You can work on all three. You can improve. There's no situation where it's hopeless and where things cannot improve. But what I focus mostly on is obviously 2 and 3, is the context, and that's the vast majority of people. Most people who, experience depression will not be in that, entrenched, long-standing, biological predisposition. They'll be in the fact that they're in a relationship or a job that's just not good for them, doesn't align with their values, but they're not aware of that. If you're in a job that really takes away the things that really matter to you, and you're on your way to have a burnout, you will not often think, this job
Did
is
you say a
not
birdhouse?
a burnout.
Oh, burnout.
Yeah. You will blame yourself. You'll think, something wrong with you. Yeah. But it's not because some of your colleagues may be thriving in that environment that it's right for you, because you have your own values, and the things that really matter to you may not be the things that matter to other people. Yeah. So the context is really important to take note of that. I've had plenty of clients who had so much on their plate, so much. That even for me, it felt overwhelming. I thought, God,
it's a weight.
Yeah, children who are really not well, physical illness, or all sorts of difficulties. But serious, outliner type stuff, not your average, health issues, but financial difficulties, not being in work, or whatever. And they just lose track of that. They just can't see that the reality is the opposite of what they believe. So they think they're not good enough, that they're failing their families, and so on. The reality is that they are incredibly resilient, incredibly strong, that I'm not sure I would be able to deal with, half of what they go through. But they, I see that from my perspective.
But it's hard to look at it.
It's difficult for them. So the context is something that you can do a lot with. It's not always easy. I notice people really struggle to get out of the context and see themselves from a different perspective, and see how all the pressures that they have to deal with, ultimately have contributed in a big part to them feeling so unwell. And then lastly, obviously, that's the bread and butter of any CBT therapist or psychologist, or is the link between how you think and how you act. And just to go back to that drinking, you said you can't understand why people go to turn to drink when they're in a mess, when they feel. It's because we are hardwired to respond to our emotions, in the quickest solution that will fix it. That's what we go with. So you said go to bed early and have a plan, and that takes effort, conscious effort. Whereas having a drink is the opposite.
It's easy.
It's easy. And by default, the human being is hardwired to go with the easy solution, to avoid any kind of effort. And you could say it has an evolutionary logic behind it, because again, thousands of years ago, it was just not appropriate to spend any energy
that you
except
don't need
doing the bare necessity, because surviving was difficult as it was. So the idea of going to the gym and burning off calories, that obviously is very recent. and goes against, you could say. It's hence why it's such a hurdle, because you're going to put yourself in a place of distress, because why? Because physical exertion equals distress. In the moment afterwards, everybody feels great, but so that's why people, we all do that, and so drink applies to some, but as I said, it could be spending time mindlessly scrolling social media. It could be, I guess, watching porn, which comes, hand in hand with forming addictions. It could be any type of substance. It doesn't need to be alcohol. Sometimes it's being a workaholic and completely going on. I mean, we all respond differently.
Everyone gets in their own little holes.
Yeah, but it often is, what is the quickest response I know or I've used thus far to alleviate that distress that I feel within me, be it depression, anxiety, be it anger, be it any type of emotion, basically. And that's what I tend to work most on, obviously, is context and that type of the link between thoughts, emotions, behaviors, how our behaviors tend to just keep us stuck rather than offer us a way out. And and then to do so, you have a multitude of modalities, or different kind of theoretical or therapeutic approaches.
Cool. Should we? I just had a thought. I mean, I don't personally know. I know there's like Samaritans and things like that. Should we be putting links? Do you think below for anyone that is having severe kind of symptoms?
Sure, I don't see why not. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anywhere? I'm guessing Samaritans is the best, kind of the most.
No. So okay. Well, in the UK, if you do experience a crisis, a mental health crisis, and you are not certain that you can keep yourself safe, be it through self-harm of significant nature or thoughts of suicide, you should actually call 999 and or if you can attend A&E. So the accidents and emergency service is not there solely to deal with broken bones and kind of physical ailments. It is also set up to deal with a crisis of a mental health sort. So that's obviously the guidance that is being given in the UK. It would be interesting to listen to how that is experienced on the other side of the curtain, and how A&E doctors feel about having this massive influx of people who present with mental health difficulties of all sorts, because they have found nowhere else to go. As well as the kind of responsibility that is being put on clinicians or workers of any sort to state these things, state like, GPs do it as well, as when they're not certain, they will say, go to A&E, but is it always appropriate? Is it always to the benefit of the client? That's a much wider discussion that will definitely ruffle some feathers, but needs to be had, because obviously, I have spoken to doctors or nurses working in A&E, and I know that quite a few of them have experienced just levels of overwhelm, as well as frustration in dealing with people who would come to their service and it ultimately wasn't appropriate for them, and that hinders their ability to deliver the care that is necessary to those who would need urgent care. I'm not saying I have the solution,
but that's the issue.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap this up then. It's been lovely seeing you, and we'll have all the episodes out.
Yeah, cool. Looking forward to it.
Peace. Have a good week, everyone.